Hello friends, today I'm trying out a new idea I had for a video series called Beginner's Guide, where I'm the beginner and I have no idea what I'm doing. And today we're going to try and make some monster leather chalk bags. Now everything I used is on screen. I basically tried to use up a bunch of scrap leather that was left over from a project my sister did. I have little to no experience in leather work, but the bags came out really well, so I'm going to show you how I did it, as I was learning, and you can learn along with me. Now, in terms of where you can source this stuff, I got pretty much all of it from a local craft store. I'm sure you've got one near you. The hole punch thingy I found, I think my sister had it, but as far as I can tell, you can buy them pretty simply, or you can do it with a hammer and a nail. I would also like to point out you can paint your own glass eyes. I bought them. I think you'd probably come up with better ideas if you just painted them. So here are some measurements that I've just provided for you. You can use those, or you can do what I did, which is take 2 A4 pieces of paper, sellotape them together, and then wrap them around into a tube and stick my hand in it until it was the size that I was happy with. This also made sizing it really, really convenient. I literally just used the same piece of paper over and over and over again to take the measurements. And for the inside, I used a velvet fabric, and the reason I did this is because it holds the chalk a bit better. I'm planning on using these as chalk bags. You could just use them as genuinely just normal bags, I think. But yes, so the inside fabric is some kind of velvet. You could also use something furry, anything that just holds the chalk in place. And the outside fabric, I used a type of polyester. This was just to make sure chalk wasn't leaking through the lining, so I just double layered it. Now, once you have all your pieces, I thought this was quite simple when I was doing it in person, but it might not come out as simple on screen, so I'm going to try and talk you through it as I do it. The first thing you want to do is take your velvet and sew a long piece of leather string inside the piece of velvet. This becomes the drawstring of the bag, and you want to tie some knots in the end of the leather because otherwise you might accidentally do what I did and pull it all the way through when I was trying to close my chalk bag, which was such a ball ache. So sew it up nice and tightly is what I'm saying. Now, once you've done this, you want to place your large piece of polyester on the bottom. Then you want to place your piece of drawstring down, as you can see here. And then you want to place the large piece of velvet leather on top. Now, again, I thought this was quite simple when I was doing it in person, but I think it is quite complicated when you're looking at it on the camera. So what you want to do is you want to fold the edges. This, again, helps to stop chalk from getting through. And it also makes a much nicer lining. And basically what you could do is you can kind of sew both pieces on at the same time. If you find it easier to do one and then the other, that's fine. But what you don't want to have done yet is sew down along the edge pieces. That's because we need to make sure that the velvet's on the inside and the polyester's on the outside. Now, the reason I'm flipping it around and looking at it is, like I said, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm doing it as I go. But the best way I found of doing this to make sure that the bag all goes together is to sort of put it in this configuration where you've got the velvet on the outside and the polyester on the outside, and then sew along both of those lines. And you won't have sewn the bottoms on yet. So what you can then do is what I'm doing here, where you fold it so the polyester bag is on the outside and the velvet's on the inside. Then you can finish sewing up the drawstring part of the bag, as you can see me doing here. And you know what? If I make another one of these videos, I promise I'll try and make it clearer, because looking back and recording the audio, this is not the clearest, but I hope you figure it out. I did, so you guys will be fine. So now what you can do is you can sew on the bottom. Now what you're wanting to do is make sure that that chalk stays in the bag. So you want to really fold those edges over and make them nice and thick. And you want to start with the velvet, and then you can start on the polyester. Now when you're sewing the polyester, you want to not sew it all the way up. So you can do what I'm doing here. You can basically turn the bag inside out and make sure that the velvet is on the inside and the polyester is on the outside. This double layer should hopefully make sure the chalk doesn't leak out of the bag, or anything else you want to put in it. So now you just sew up that final hole, and don't worry too much if it's messy, because this internal polyester bag isn't going to be visible once we start adding the leather, which is the fun part. So speaking of leather, I used a bunch of scrap leather that was left over from a project my sister did. You can also go down to your local fabric store. I promise you they'll probably have a box of scrap leather that you can buy pieces for £1 or £2 each. So we're going to look at 2 options for the leather design for the outside of this bag. The first is a repeating pattern. Now all you have to do is make some kind of shape that's repeatable. I used this funky little curvy shape, and you just draw it on top of that piece of paper we used earlier for measurement. This way The leather does tend to be slightly bigger than the internal bag, but if it isn't, it's fine because the internal bag will just crumple up to fit. And you can just cut out these pieces of leather in a repeating pattern, as you can see here. But you can do any pattern. Like, you don't have to follow me. You can do your own thing. I encourage you to do your own thing. So yeah, that's option 1. Option 2, this was my original idea in the first bag that I made, is to just take bits of scrap leather and sort of just jigsaw puzzle them together until you have a funky kind of scrap monster bag design. It doesn't all have to fit together very well. You can just cut the pieces so they cut down to size. And also you can add things like a pocket, which is just a big piece of leather. I mean, this is not very complicated. And yeah, literally just throw them all together until you find a pattern that you like that fits the shape of the bag. So as far as I'm aware, there's probably an actual name for this thing, but I called it the leather hole punch thingy, and I can't be asked to Google what it is. You can do the exact same thing with a hammer and a nail if you don't have one of them, so don't worry, you don't need a specialized tool to do this. So for this symmetrical piece, I measured where I wanted each hole to be, and that way the sewing would line up, and then I sewed the top and then the bottom and then the top, and the reason I did this was to leave a place for us to put eyes in later. And then all I did was sew these pieces together and stick the internal bag in to make sure it was around about the right shape. You know, it's mostly an approximation. Now, if you want to add something like a pocket, that's really easy. It is literally just a big piece of leather. I sewed some scrap red velvet I had behind it so that it sort of matched the inside of the bag. You could just sew it directly onto the polyester, I would assume. I just think this way is a bit neater and looks a bit nicer. But, you know, whatever floats your boat. It depends how much spare material you have left over. And again, as with the symmetrical bag, with the scrap leather bag, I literally just punched a bunch of random holes in it. I didn't even bother measuring them, I'm going to be honest. I mostly just did that by eye. But you probably should measure it. Like I said, this is a beginner's guide, and I am a beginner. And then it is literally just a case of sewing every single piece together. It does take quite a while. I would suggest doubling up on the thread as well, because it makes the bag a bit stronger. And whilst you're doing this, you should be sort of vaguely trying to figure out where you want to put your eyes. Now, the eyes will go in between the pieces of scrap leather. And you can just put a stitch in to hold it in place and cut it later, or you can just leave them stitchless. But yeah, you want to be thinking about where your eyes go if you're doing the scrap leather version of this bag, because they can kind of go anywhere, and that's quite a lot of fun. And again, you want to be keeping that piece of paper that we sellotaped together at the beginning as sort of like a sizing guide, just to make sure that you're not over or under the size. This is so rudimentary, but it does work quite well. So now we have the two outsides of the bags. We can cut the leather bases. Now for the symmetrical one, I had a piece of blue leather that was the right size, so I just cut one singular piece of leather. But for the non-symmetrical one, I sort of put together a couple of pieces of leather in a circle. It's not too difficult. It'd be easier if you cut the circle out of paper first, but I didn't do that. I'm literally just thinking about that now whilst I recorded it. That would have definitely made this a lot easier. But yeah, just like the other parts of the scrap leather bag, you're just sewing together some pieces into a circle. I left a hole at the bottom of this one so that I could put an eye, and I would suggest for the diameter of the circle, measuring out where you want to bang holes with the nail or with the leather hole punchy thingy. So once you've done that, you turn it inside out and you sew all of the way around. If you've mismeasured it a little bit and it's wonky, that's fine. It's supposed to look like a monster anyway, so don't think about it too much. So the tongue is super easy. It's literally just a strip of leather with a notch cut out of the end. And what you want to do is you want to get a pair of press fasteners, and one press fastener goes in the end of your tongue, and the other press fastener goes at the bottom of your bag somewhere, wherever you want to place it. This is really up to you. And I also forgot to film doing that, so good luck. just put it somewhere on the bottom of the bag. You can use the tongue as a measurement, and also use a hammer and not a mug, because I broke this mug making this tongue. Now what you want to do is sew the inside of the tongue onto the polyester internal part of the bag, a couple of centimeters down, so that you won't be able to see the stitching. And now we're going to talk about putting on the teeth and the tongues. I used air dry clay. I literally just cut it up into little notches and rolled them into a sort of tooth-like shape and added a few bits of sort of scarring and stuff on them. And I painted them with literally just some acrylics to make them a bit yellower. And the important part is that they must have a hole in them, because this is where your stitch is going to go through to hold them in place. But yeah, you can They kind of look like candy corn now that I look at them, but they're supposed to be teeth. So now onto eyes. I just bought some, but I would suggest going over and looking at a creator called Sweaty Fiddle on Instagram. She paints her own eyes for her stuff, and they're really cool. So they're worth, if you think you can do it, it's worth having a go. And I encourage you to have a go. I was lazy, I purchased them. So what you want to do is you want to use some fabric glue to attach these eyes to the polyester lining on the inside, and then you want to stitch them into place. This is quite tricky, and I'm not really sure how to explain it properly, but I would suggest doing a couple of practice runs before you start sewing them onto your bag, because you really need to bend the leather out of the way to kind of try and make an eyebrow. Now for the teeth, you're going to figure out exactly how many you want and where you want to put them on the top part of your bag. I think for this one I chose 6, and for the other one I chose 8. And what you're doing is you're literally just sewing them into place. You want to do a couple of rounds, and you want it to be about 2 centimeters or 1 centimeter below the polyester lining where it attaches to the velvet. This is so you won't be able to see the sewing once we've sewed this all up. As you can see, I did sort of 5 or 6 wraps around it to keep it in place. Now what you want are some eyelets and your leather punchy thingy and or nail and a hammer. I put one of these eyelets on each side of the teeth. I thought that looked pretty neat. And again, you literally just hammer these into place. It's really quite fun. But I picked a sort of symmetrical pattern, but you don't really need to. You can just hammer as many of them in as you want. When you're hammering these in place, you want to have left enough space to fold the leather over. This gives you a much neater edge line than having just raw leather on the top. And when you're sewing the leather to the polyester, you want to make sure your needle's coming out where the velvet is, and that way you won't see any polyester at the end. Now, the last thing we're going to do, and you probably should have done this earlier, but you also should have watched this video all the way through before you started making this bag, so this is your problem, is shove in a bunch of zip ties. Now, the zip ties keep it strong and standing. It would be way better to do that before you sew the whole thing together, so you're welcome for me telling you that at the end. And yeah, I made 3 of these. All 3 were Christmas presents. The first one I made for my brother, and then the other 2 I made because I was like, wow, this is really fun. I'm going to make a bunch more. And I never made one for myself, which was kind of dumb. But yeah, you can use this. There's plenty of ways you can modify these designs to use them as just a side bag or something. But I made them specifically for climbing as chalk bags because, well, I thought that would be fun. But you really can just change it. This was my first real time doing any major leather working. My sister made a corset for me recently that was very cool, and it was pretty fun. The one that's on screen at the moment was the first one that I did, so you can see it's a bit more dodgy. But I hope you had fun, and I hope you make one yourself. I think I'm supposed to tell you to like and subscribe.